Welcome to WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast. This episode was made possible by a generous sponsorship from AstraZeneca. For more information, visit AstraZeneca.com. In this episode, Taryn Grome, editor-in-chief of Pharma Voice magazine, meets with Heidi Hunter, president, Cardinal Health Specialty Solutions.
Heidi, welcome to the WOW podcast program.
Thank you, Taryn. I have to tell you that when I heard that you wanted me to come onto this program, I was humbled and surprised. So it's great to be here. Thank you.
Well, it should be no surprise, and that's very nice that you're humbled, but I am fascinated by your career journey, and I can't wait to dig in a little bit to that. I know you've worked globally for big public pharma companies and for private pharma companies, covering a range of therapeutic categories. I also know that you've built several global teams. Talk to me about what are some of the most valuable lessons you have learned along the way?
Okay, well, so my career started over 25 years ago, and it actually started in Basel, Switzerland. So my first role was in product management in Switzerland, and I learned a tremendous amount from there. I was on a management development track that took me to South Africa, and after that, I finally took my first role um, in the United States. So I've learned a lot about how important it is to be curious, how important it is to get to know the people you work with so that you really understand not just the culture of the company, but the culture of the people you work with. And then also how to get really anything done in healthcare, it takes a team.
It definitely takes a team, that is for
Takes a
sure.
team, yeah.
Um, Heidi, when I talk to other leaders in the industry, and I ask about that global experience,
Yeah.
they often say that it has provided them with a unique perspective. Would you say the same? And tell me how that global experience has maybe shaped your perspective.
Sure. So I come from a global family. My dad is from Canada and my mom is from Germany. So when I was growing up, I didn't really see the lines. It wasn't really a different place. But as I got more into business in the United States, I really realized, wow, there are other ways of thinking about how to create value in business. And that's what intrigued me about working in other countries and looking at how do you create value in other countries. So I didn't just do it for sort of the one-off or, oh, this is different and adding to my life. It was really all part of the same journey, and I would highly recommend it to anybody.
Do you think having that global experience is a necessary to get into that C-suite, or is it a nice to have?
I think it really depends on the business area that you're in. Although I really believe that people who have worked outside of the United States or outside of their home country, whatever that might be, that they bring a whole different perspective to to issues and to leadership. So I would highly recommend it, but many people have been successful being in the same company for 20 years plus as well. So I really think that there's no one way that we gather our learnings that are required to really lead. I think each one of us is a bit different in that way.
Fantastic. Just a minute ago, you also touched upon the need for great teams. What do you
Yeah.
look for when you go to build a team? What are some of those traits or characteristics that your leads need to have to be part of one of your teams?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I like to build teams, and I really like to build teams often with people inside the organization. I think there's often a lot of talent in organizations that needs to be shown the experience of doing something new, and then it brings double value to the organization. So what I often look for in people is, first of all, curiosity, and secondly, that they have this element um, of I have a dream, and so if it's to be a CEO, or they one day want to run their own company, or they want to create the greatest NGO in a specific area that serves a need that's identified in their family. And so when I'm telling you these examples, I'm thinking of the people that have been leaders on my teams, and so you want to see that desire for more, and that curiosity, and that lack of fear of failure, and that's what I look for.
Excellent. I think those are all characteristics and traits that we all should strive towards. So wonderful insights and advice. Talk to me a little bit about why the specialty pharma space, particularly oncology, has been a draw for you. There's a lot of therapeutic categories out there. Why was
Yeah.
this?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. I've actually worked in a lot of therapeutic categories, and so when I started my career, it was in CNS and cardiovascular, some what was at the time fairly traditional large therapeutic areas. And but over time, I really realized the value of biologic therapies, which then took me into oncology. And so, what's pulled me throughout my career is, again, the curiosity around the science and how you connect the science to actually creating patient benefit, and all that goes into it in between. And so oncology in particular is an area where at the time you could see this more than other therapeutic areas. I would say that's changed. Today, oncology is still very vibrant, and we're really creating great new therapies that are allowing people to live better lives and longer lives. But other areas are really coming up as well, such as immunology, and of course the gene area, which will serve some of the genetic conditions that previously we thought were unsolvable. So it's really the science, and really looking at that specific benefit for patients through the science.
Yeah, that's great. You've touched on a couple of times in value and benefit. How do you define that value and benefit in terms
Oh.
of, yeah, it makes that a little question. I'm going to throw you the big question. How do you
Ah,
define that value and benefit then? I mean, there's a lot of competing factors there.
yeah. In the end, you really have to focus on the patient. And I know everybody probably is talking about that in your podcast, but it is really what drives me. And it's not just, did we help that patient? It has to be um, really a significant improvement over where those patients are today. And there are many areas where we can make those gains for patients, and that's what both in the development area as well as in the commercialization area of new therapies or innovations. That's what I look for.
Excellent. And, while we all do tend to talk about patients, I don't think we can talk about patients enough. So that's
Me
all,
either. Me
that's
either.
perfectly fine. So we've talked a lot about your experience in pharma and how is that shaping your role at Cardinal, and how do you view your role at Cardinal?
Uh, Thank you for that question. So, it's, having been in healthcare practically my entire career, I thought, familiar with Cardinal Health, and in my mind, they had an excellent reputation. But a few years ago, I had the opportunity to work with them much more closely, and I realized there's so much more here at Cardinal than I knew. Of course, I knew, the excellent third-party logistics of Cardinal, and I knew, that they had a great medical uh, device and supply area, but there was so much I didn't know. And so through that opportunity, I was really fortunate to get to know people within Cardinal and see how they focused on their customers to help their customers focus on the patient. So that was number one. Since coming to Cardinal, I've learned that Cardinal is uniquely focused on how they utilize their position in the market to actually take on disruptive innovation that can support the patient. So that's what really attracted me here. This idea that Cardinal, and not just the idea, but really the reality that Cardinal sits at the crossroads of healthcare between the healthcare providers, the pharmaceuticals, the biotech companies, the payers, and the patients, and how to utilize that position to create additional value for patients. So that's what really attracted me.
Well, let's go on to that theme of innovation. What are some of the biggest trends you're currently tracking in the specialty pharma business? What should we be on the lookout for?
So trends in pharma. So one, I think that is here now, and we're all feeling it, is really even more patient involvement in their own healthcare. And I think as we look at that trend and begin to consider the impacts of that will coincide with another shift in the market, which is, the specialty drugs, especially the specialty biologics, moving to biosimilars as their patent life runs out. And I think as more patients become involved in their healthcare and create a deeper understanding about the quality of biosimilars, I think you're going to see that shift in the market that will be probably smoother than what those of us who remember the shift in the generic industry back in the 80s, then that happened because we've learned so much from that experience. So patient involvement in their health, and in their health to get quality care and value out of their healthcare dollar. I think also in the area of healthcare delivery, there is the trend towards more public-private partnerships. And I think there's no place that we see that better than what's currently happening in terms of the COVID therapy developments and of course, the amazing vaccine developments that we've seen over the last year. We need each other, sort of the public sphere and the private sphere, to really make things happen, to create that value that we need in society for patient health. So I think that is also a trend that we will see more of, the public-private partnerships. What's often talked about in healthcare is, of course, the growth in cell and gene therapies. And here I think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg, not only when it comes to the cell and gene therapies, but also in their ability to impact patient care, patient longevity, the quality of patients' lives, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, in areas that we thought we would never conquer. So there, it's only the beginning. And that, of course, leads to challenging opportunities for businesses like Cardinal Health, where we look at how can we support with the logistics, the distribution, the reimbursement in the patient journey so that these therapies are actually utilized where they should be. So probably the last one, because I look at a lot of trends, and Marcia knows this, that I really am passionate about is data enablement. I think in healthcare, despite everything that we're doing around electronic medical records and analyzing how best to serve patients in a certain therapeutic group so they have the best outcomes. We've really there also only touched the tip of the iceberg to use augmented intelligence to really support how we deliver care. And, this goes beyond telemedicine, and it really goes into looking at how do we manage different patients to get the best outcomes.
So is that almost an extension into real world data, real world evidence then?
It could be. I mean, that's a big term, real world evidence, and it means many things to many people. I think we're seeing a lot more in the clinical development sphere with patient outcomes being measured beyond the clinical outcomes, and I think that's really important. What is developing now as well is the acknowledgement that real world data is supportive of clinical data and may be supportive, of the risk benefit of the clinical data. And so I think that's where we're seeing more and more of what the power of the data can do.
And that all ties back to your concepts around value and benefit to patients, because without that data supporting those clinical outcomes, we don't, then the patients nor the system really derives the benefit from that particular therapy.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. I think in the past, we would always look for, is my efficacy greater than the other guy's efficacy, or are my side effects less and my efficacy just a little bit more? And those are very important parameters to look at. But beyond that, we really have to look at how is it affecting the patient's life? How long does the effect last? How do we perhaps taper the therapy to allow the patient potentially to live drug-free? And all these things come from real-world evidence.
Excellent. To switch tacks just a little bit, let's talk about how you're leading the company right now. You're somewhat new in the role. So how are you setting the strategic direction for Cardinal?
Yeah, so I started at Cardinal just over 4 months ago. And so, I started during the pandemic. The
Crazy,
computer,
right?
Yeah, the computer is my friend, I have to say. So I've learned a lot about being on camera all the time. It's kind of refreshing not to be on camera right now. And I think that, many of the things that worked in person can work over Zoom. And the first one is, though, that you have to establish that relationship. And we were talking about that earlier a little bit. That now most of our relationships are through Zoom, and those relationships can actually be quite deep and intense and almost jarring when you meet the person in person if you've only met them through Zoom. So what I try to do is, through those meetings, really establish trust. That is the foundation of leadership, I believe, is to have the trust of your leaders and especially your teams along the way. And everything then emanates from there. So I think once you tell them you're going to trust them from the beginning, and if they make mistakes, you still trust them. Then you have to start to build that inclusivity around that trust, and that builds trust. So through the inclusivity, transparency, and giving trust first, that's normally how I lead.
Great advice. You have obviously had ascending roles of responsibility leading up to your current role. What are some pieces of advice you might share with other women who are looking to ascend to that C-suite, are there some things that you have learned or tips along the way that you can share with us?
Sure. I don't think it's the same for everyone. And even though I really enjoy what I'm doing right now, and it's energizing for me, this might not be what everybody wants. But I think what's really important is to follow your curiosity and always make the most of it. And in my case, I was always drawn to the tough projects. And I actually, earlier in my career, had people say to me, why are you taking those tough projects? Like they could fail. And for some reason, and maybe it was naivety, I was not worried about that. I really wanted to see, could we crack that? Can we actually develop a business around that? And through doing those tough projects, I learned a tremendous amount about the industry and how different parts of the industry really tick differently, and how you need to understand the environments around healthcare as well as healthcare itself to get things done and to have things be successful. So I think, if I was going to give advice to anyone, is definitely follow your curiosity, and always try to be thinking, how do I relate that back to creating value for patients? This is one of the reasons I became involved in biosimilars so deeply when I worked with Boehringer Ingelheim. I I really believe that those are excellent therapeutics that can benefit patients greatly and relieve some of the costs in the healthcare system and open up space for further innovation. So, so if I'm giving advice, I would say it doesn't have to all look perfect. That's one. You don't have to look perfect all the time. You need to show grit and ability to engage and team with others. And I would say, always be thinking about what is possible and not just all the things that are going to hold an opportunity back.
I was chuckling when you said, when you were talking about, well, the project could fail. And I thought, but the
Yeah,
project could succeed too. I mean,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I agree. I
That's
agree.
the beauty of it. So those are those
Yeah.
half glass full people and then the glass half empty people. So
Yeah,
you're
and at the time I was in the bigger companies, and I think in the bigger companies, and this is, 15, 20 years ago, that people were cautious. We need more of that fire of innovation, no matter where people are, also in the big companies. And, it's definitely at Cardinal. I really feel there's that fire. And, but we need it throughout the industry. And I really believe we've seen it with the vaccine development now. I, I'm in awe of what they've done. So
I agree.
I know we've got it.
I agree. I think we've seen companies that have been traditionally so conservative really step out of their comfort zones completely and take some very big strategic and calculated risks. And I
Yeah,
don't mean risks by
it's
putting
impressive.
patients at risk, but really challenging their internal operations and development protocols to move as quickly as possible. So it
Yeah,
has been very impressive.
yeah, yeah. It's
Um,
really set a new bar of the art of the possible. I believe
Exactly.
that. Yeah,
Exactly. And I talked to a lot of people saying, is this pace, is it sustainable? And everybody's like, I don't know about that, but we know we can't go back to the way things were either totally. So there's some silver linings there, I guess.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, I also know that you serve on the board of Vicor Pharma. Why is it important for you to seek out and hold board positions? What does that mean for
Yeah.
you in your
Well, first of all, when I first thought I wanted to look at boards, it was really to guide innovation, and that was probably the wrong perspective to have. Um, I think now, for me, the experience of being on a board is much more about taking this whole idea of how business is governed and leadership is supported to a different level. And so that's why now I think it's really important to be on boards. It's to help leaders and support leaders to really ask the right questions of their teams and work as a support for them. Of course, you have audit committees and risk that you're managing as well as governance, but it's really important to look at how do you help guide without getting your fingers dirty in there, because that's the job of the CEO. But it's a great perspective, and I really highly recommend it for anybody who wants to get into a C-suite role, because when you're in the C-suite, you're communicating with the board a lot. What's important is to really learn and understand the perspective of the board and how they want to support you to guide the company, and support you and challenge you to guide the company. And in that challenge is really what you need. So I think boards are in that way very educational for young executives. And I think for others, they can be a challenge. And that challenge is what we need from each other to keep each other fresh and on our toes. There's a lot of discussion about there should be more women in the boardroom. And of course, I absolutely believe that. The boardroom should be very representative of society whenever possible. And then we will have, a much more holistic and thoughtful conversation around business and how to move business forward on behalf of society.
Couldn't agree with you more. Perfectly stated. And Heidi, finally, because this is our WOW podcast, tell me about an accomplishment or a wow moment that either shaped or changed the trajectory of your career.
I think, one great moment was when I was given the opportunity, and this will round back to what we talked about earlier, to take on a team of people who in the oncology area, and to really learn how to shape a business. And so at the time, I had a really large P&L, and I moved to the oncology business, and it was a much smaller P&L. And what really shaped me there was I learned that your impact is not necessarily based on the size of your P&L. That your impact is much more about how you go about your work and what you do with those teams. And it was really through that opportunity, that first opportunity in oncology, that I learned that.
Fabulous. Well, Heidi, thank you so much for spending some time with us for our podcast program. And thank you so much for sharing such great insights about your career journey, the value and benefit that we should all be looking toward to bring to patients, and your commitment to patients. It's been delightful speaking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Taryn.
Thank you for listening to this episode of WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast. And thanks to AstraZeneca for making this episode possible. For more information, visit AstraZeneca.com. And don't forget to check out our other WOW episodes at pharmavoice.com/wow. This 2021 program is copyrighted by PharmaLinks, LLC.